My name is Victoria Hughes. I'm 32 years old, and the day I discovered what my mother was really doing while claiming she couldn't afford to see her own granddaughter was the day I stopped believing that blood automatically equals loyalty. You won't believe what happened next, because what I found wasn't just a lie. It was years of calculated betrayal disguised as financial struggle. Mom said money was tight, so she wouldn't come. Then I discovered what she was really doing. That title probably makes you wonder how a mother could betray her own daughter right? Well, let me take you back to where it all started, because the truth I uncovered didn't just break my heart. It shattered every memory I thought was real. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Growing up, I was taught that understanding meant accepting less, that maturity meant swallowing disappointment with a smile, and that love meant always making excuses for the people who hurt you. My mother had this way of making me feel selfish whenever I wanted her presence, like asking for her time was somehow asking for too much. She'd say things like, "You know I'm struggling right now, Victoria," or "I wish I could be there, but money is just so tight." And I believed her every single time. I normalized the pain of being last on her priority list because I thought that's what good daughters did. They understood, they didn't complain, they just accepted it. But here's the thing about normalizing your own suffering. You don't realize you're drowning until someone finally pulls you to the surface and shows you what breathing actually feels like. For years, I convinced myself that my mother's absence was circumstantial, that her excuses were valid, that her love was there even if her presence wasn't. I told myself that one day, when things got better for her, she'd finally show up. I held on to that hope like a lifeline, never realizing that I was the only one holding on. She had already let go a long time ago. My mother, Linda Hughes, had been using the money is tight excuse for as long as I could remember. And somewhere along the way, it became the family script, the go-to justification for every missed birthday, every canceled visit, every broken promise. When I was younger, I'd hear her tell my father, "I can't make it to Victoria's school play, Richard. The car needs repairs and I just can't afford the gas right now." My dad would sigh, nod, and tell me, "Your mom loves you, sweetheart. She's just going through a tough time." And I'd nod too, because that's what we did. We accepted, we understood, we moved on. If you're relating to this story already, hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because what I'm about to reveal next will make you question every excuse you've ever accepted from someone you love. As I got older, the excuses evolved, but the pattern stayed the same. There was always a reason why she couldn't be, always some financial crisis that conveniently aligned with events that mattered to me. My high school graduation? "Victoria, honey, I'm so sorry, but I just got hit with an unexpected bill, and I can't afford the hotel." My college acceptance celebration? "I wish I could drive up there, but the car insurance is due and I'm completely broke." My wedding? "You know I'd love to be there, but flights are so expensive right now and I just don't have it." Each time, I swallowed the disappointment, plastered on a smile, and told myself that her financial struggles were real, that her love was genuine even if her presence was missing. What I didn't realize back then was that I was teaching myself to accept emotional crumbs while convincing myself I was receiving a full meal. I became an expert at rationalizing her absence, at finding reasons why her excuses made sense, at protecting her from my own hurt. I'd tell my friends, "Oh, my mom's going through a rough patch financially. She really wanted to come but just couldn't swing it." I'd post photos from my special moments on social media with captions like, "Wish mom could be here, but sending love from afar." I became her biggest defender, her most loyal advocate, all while she was busy being absent. I normalized the pain so thoroughly that I forgot what it felt like to expect more, to demand more, to deserve more. Ugh. The day my daughter, Emily, was born, I made a silent promise to her, a promise to be the kind of mother I had always needed but never had. I wanted her to remember birthdays, not just by the gifts, but by the warmth in the room, the laughter of family, and my arms wrapped around her. I built our little world stone by stone, determined to protect her from that cold ache of feeling invisible. If this story is hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. You're going to want to see how this unfolds. Every year, I worked double shifts just to make sure her birthdays were special, that she didn't feel the absence I once felt. I hung streamers, baked cakes from scratch, even when I could barely keep my eyes open, invited cousins and friends, filled our apartment with joy. But deep down, there was always that empty seat at the table, one that belonged to my mom, Linda. I tried to brush aside the disappointment so that Emily wouldn't notice, but every time Emily asked, "Will Grandma be coming this year?" I could feel my heart crack a little bit more. I didn't want to repeat the cycle of distance and cold excuses, so I poured everything into being present, into building a real family, even if I had to do it mostly on my own. when Emily hugged me after blowing out her birthday candles and whispered, "Thank you, Mommy." This was the best day ever. It felt like my heart was healing, one piece at a time, but that empty seat was always there, reminding me that some wounds run deeper than others, and some stories aren't as simple as they seem. A few days before Emily's 7th birthday, I got the message I'd been dreading, a long text from Linda, my mother, filled with the same tired lines. "I'm so sorry, Vic, but money is too tight this month. I really wish I could come. Give Emily a big hug from me." It was so familiar I could have recited it by heart. For a split second, I almost replied without thinking, reassuring her that it was okay, that we understood, that of course Emily would get her love from afar. Before I continue, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next is absolutely insane, and leave a like if you've ever been let down by someone you trusted. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the way Emily's face fell when I gently explained Grandma wouldn't make it, or maybe it was the exhaustion I felt from carrying both the joy and the disappointment year after year. I didn't argue or beg her to try harder. I just set my phone down and let the silence hang heavy in the air. Later that night, as I tucked Emily into bed, she looked at me and asked, "Did I do something wrong? Is that why Grandma never comes?" That question hit me like a punch to the gut. How do you explain to a child that love sometimes isn't enough to make people show up? I lay awake for hours replaying Linda's message over and over, searching for hidden meaning, hoping there was an explanation I was missing. But all I found was the same ache, the same worry that maybe I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't enough to make my mother want to be a part of our lives. That night, as Emily slept beside me, I realized something had to change. I couldn't let my daughter grow up believing she was unworthy of showing up for, the way I once did. After Emily's party ended and the last guest went home, I sat alone in the kitchen surrounded by deflated balloons and dirty plates, trying once again to rationalize my mother's absence. I told myself she must be struggling more than I realized, that maybe she was embarrassed about her financial situation, that her pride was keeping her away. I built elaborate explanations in my mind, anything to avoid facing the simpler, more painful truth that maybe she just didn't care enough to find a way. This is how emotional survival works when you've been disappointed so many times. You create a buffer between yourself and reality, a protective shield made of excuses and justification. I became an expert at defending Linda to myself, at finding reasons why her behavior made sense, at convincing myself that her love was real even when her actions said otherwise. Every time someone asked, "Where's your mom?" I'd launch into my well-rehearsed explanation about financial hardship, never once allowing myself to question whether money was really the issue. But that night, as I cleaned up alone, something inside me started to crack. I caught myself mid-thought, mid-excuse, and realized I was doing to myself what I'd been doing for years, protecting her at the expense of my own feelings, minimizing my hurt so she wouldn't have to face her choices. The question I kept avoiding finally forced its way to the surface. If she truly wanted to be here, wouldn't she have found a way? Just once? 3 days after Emily's birthday, I ran into my old friend Sarah at the grocery store, and what started as casual small talk turned into the moment everything changed. Sarah mentioned, almost casually, that she'd seen my mother last weekend at a charity gala downtown, one of those fancy fundraiser events where tickets cost hundreds of dollars and attendees wear designer dresses. My blood went cold. I stood there frozen in the produce aisle, holding a bag of apples, trying to process what I'd just heard. I managed to keep my voice steady as I asked Sarah for details, and each word she spoke felt like a knife twisting deeper. The gala had been on Saturday night, the same night as Emily's birthday party. Linda had been dressed elegantly, laughing with friends, sipping champagne at a table near the front. Sarah showed me a photo from the event's public Facebook page, and there she was, my mother, radiant and smiling, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, clearly not struggling with money, clearly not too broke to travel. She looked happy, carefree, completely unburdened by the absence she'd chosen. I thanked Sarah, finished my shopping on autopilot, and sat in my car for 20 minutes staring at that photo on my phone. Every excuse I'd ever made for her, every justification I'd carefully constructed, every time I defended her choices, it all came crashing down in that parking lot. The money is tight story wasn't just an exaggeration or a temporary situation. It was a deliberate lie, repeated so many times I'd stopped questioning it. And the worst part? She'd been at that expensive event while her own granddaughter blew out birthday candles, wondering why Grandma didn't love her enough to show up. I couldn't let it go. That photo haunted me, replaying in my mind every time I closed my eyes. I needed to know if this was an isolated incident or part of a bigger pattern I'd been too blind to see. So I did something I'd never done before. I started looking. I checked Linda's social media profiles, scrolled through months of posts I'd ignored because I was too busy believing her excuses. What I found made my stomach turn. If you're as shocked as I am right now, hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because the truth I uncovered gets even worse from here. There were photos from a weekend trip to Napa Valley 2 months earlier, tagged at expensive wineries with captions about treating myself. There was a post from a high-end restaurant's grand opening, complete with pictures of her and her friends toasting with expensive cocktails. I found check-ins at yoga retreats, spa days, and boutique shopping trips. Each post was a piece of evidence, a nail in the coffin of the story she'd been selling me for years. She wasn't broke. She wasn't struggling. She was living a full, vibrant life, one that apparently had no room for her daughter or granddaughter. I cross-referenced dates, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Last Christmas, when she claimed she couldn't afford to visit, she'd posted photos from a ski resort in Colorado. On Emily's 5th birthday, when she said car repairs wiped out her budget, she'd been at a concert in Las Vegas. Every major event she'd missed, every milestone she'd skipped, there was evidence of her doing something else, something expensive, something fun, something she'd chosen over us. The betrayal wasn't just about missing one party, it was years of calculated lies, years of making me feel guilty for expecting her presence, years of choosing her social life over her family. The worst part wasn't even the lies themselves, it was realizing I'd been the fool who defended her to everyone, including myself. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for her to Emily, painting Grandma as this struggling hero who loved us but couldn't afford to show it. I'd protected Linda's image while she was out living her best life, posting it all over social media for everyone except me to see. How many people knew the truth? How many of her friends had seen those posts and wondered why she never mentioned her daughter or granddaughter? I felt like I'd been living in a carefully constructed illusion, one where my mother loved me but circumstances kept us apart. The truth was so much simpler and so much more painful. She had the money, she had the time, she had the ability to be in our lives. She just didn't want to. Every "I wish I could be there" was a lie. Every "money is just so tight right now" was manipulation. Every time I'd felt selfish for wanting her presence, she'd been actively choosing to be somewhere else, with someone else, doing something else that mattered more to her than we did. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. Not the quiet, controlled tears of disappointment I was used to, but deep, body-shaking sobs of betrayal and rage. I mourned the mother I thought I had, the relationship I thought we'd have someday when things got better, the grandmother Emily deserved but would never know. I grieved for every birthday, every holiday, every milestone where I'd swallowed my hurt and made excuses, never realizing that on the other side of those excuses was someone who simply didn't care enough to choose us. That's the thing about silent betrayal. It accumulates quietly until one day you look back and realize you've been carrying years of lies on your shoulders, protecting the person who hurt you most. For 3 days, I carried that knowledge like a boulder on my chest, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to focus on anything except the decision I had to make. Part of me wanted to pretend I'd never seen those photos, to go back to the comfortable delusion where ignorance provided a thin shield against the truth. At least when I didn't know for certain, I could still hold on to the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, she actually cared. But now that illusion was shattered, and I couldn't unsee what I'd discovered. I kept rehearsing confrontations in my head, imagining what I'd say, how she'd react, whether she'd even admit the truth or just pile on more lies. The thought of calling her out terrified me because it meant crossing a line I could never uncross. As long as I stayed quiet, I could maintain the status quo, the distant but technically existing relationship we had. If I confronted her, I risked losing even that fragile connection. And that's what abuse and manipulation do to you. They make you afraid to demand better because you're convinced that the crumbs you're receiving are better than nothing at all. But then I'd look at Emily, watch her draw pictures for Grandma Linda that would never be seen, hear her ask innocent questions about why Grandma didn't visit, and I'd realize staying silent wasn't protecting anyone. It was teaching my daughter that accepting lies and emotional neglect was normal. I'd spent my whole life normalizing my mother's absence, and now I was passing that trauma down to the next generation. The cycle had to stop, not just for me, but for Emily. She deserved to grow up knowing that love shows up, that people who truly care make the effort, and that accepting less than you deserve isn't loyalty, it's self-abandonment. I called Linda on a Thursday afternoon, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. When she answered with her usual cheerful, "Hi, sweetheart," like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just missed another milestone while living it up elsewhere, something inside me snapped. I didn't ease into it or soften my words. I just said, "I saw the photos from the charity gala. the one that happened the same night as Emily's birthday. The silence on the other end was deafening. Make sure you're subscribed because you need to hear how she tried to talk her way out of this. And drop a like if you think what she did was unforgivable. Linda's voice shifted immediately, losing that warm, motherly tone and turning defensive. Victoria, I can explain. It was a work obligation. I had to be there. I felt my anger rising like a wave. A work obligation, I repeated, my voice steady but cold. You're retired, Mom. And what about Napa Valley? What about Colorado at Christmas? What about every single time you told me you couldn't afford to visit while you were posting photos from restaurants and spas and vacations? She tried to interrupt, to deflect, but I didn't let her. For the first time in my life, I didn't protect her from the consequences of her choices. She cycled through every manipulation tactic in the book. First came the justification. Those trips were gifts from friends. I didn't actually pay for them. Then came the guilt trips. I can't believe you're attacking me like this. I'm your mother. Then the victim card. You have no idea how hard my life has been. You have no right to judge my choices. And finally, when nothing else worked, came the gaslighting. You're being dramatic, Victoria. You're twisting things to make me look bad. I sat there listening to her scramble for excuses, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. Not as the struggling mother I'd invented to ease my pain, but as someone who'd been perfectly content lying to my face for years as long as it meant she could live her life without the inconvenience of actually being a parent or grandmother. When Linda finally ran out of excuses and the call ended with her hanging up on me, I sat in complete silence, feeling something I hadn't expected: relief. Not the kind of relief that comes from resolution or reconciliation, but the relief of finally seeing the truth without the filter of hope distorting it. My mother hadn't changed during that phone call. I had. I'd stopped protecting her, stopped defending her, stopped sacrificing my reality to maintain her comfortable lies. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I'd been grieving the wrong loss all along. For years, I'd mourned the absence of my mother at important events, the missing relationship, the grandmother Emily didn't have. But the real loss wasn't her absence. It was the years I'd spent convincing myself that her absence was temporary, circumstantial, fixable. I'd been grieving a fantasy, a version of Linda that existed only in my imagination, the mother I needed her to be, rather than the person she actually was. Now that the illusion was shattered, I could finally grieve the real loss. Not the mother who couldn't show up, but the mother who never intended to. That night, I made a decision that terrified me but felt necessary for survival. I wouldn't cut Linda off completely. That felt too dramatic, too much like stooping to her level. But I would stop expecting anything from her. Stop making excuses for her. Stop protecting Emily from the truth. I would set boundaries I should have set years ago. No more emergency loans that were never repaid. No more emotional labor spent managing her feelings. No more last-minute schedule changes to accommodate her whims. I would treat her like she'd been treating me, as someone optional, someone peripheral, someone who exists on the edges of my life but doesn't get to occupy the center. If she wanted a relationship with us, she'd have to earn it with actual effort, not empty promises. The first test of my new boundaries came 2 weeks later when Linda called asking to borrow money for unexpected medical bills. In the past, I would have immediately asked how much she needed and figured out a way to help, even if it meant putting my own bills at risk. This time, I said something I'd never said before. No, just that. No explanation, no apology, no offer to help in other ways. The silence that followed was thick with her shock. She'd been counting on my predictable response, on my inability to say no to her. She tried every angle. She reminded me of times she'd helped me as a child, conveniently forgetting the years of absence. She suggested I was being cruel and unforgiving, playing the wounded mother card. She even brought up Emily, saying, "What kind of example are you setting for your daughter, refusing to help family?" That last one almost broke me. But then I realized the example I was setting for Emily was that she didn't have to accept manipulation disguised as love, that boundaries weren't cruelty, that saying no to people who repeatedly hurt you wasn't abandonment. It was self-preservation. I told Linda the truth, calmly and clearly. I can't keep funding your lifestyle while you tell me you're too broke to be part of our lives. I've seen the photos, Mom. I know where your money goes. If you genuinely have a medical emergency, you can show me the bills and I'll consider helping. But I'm done being your backup plan while you prioritize everything and everyone else. She hung up again, and I knew this was the beginning of either a real change or a permanent distance. Either way, I'd finally chosen myself and Emily over the exhausting work of keeping someone else's lies comfortable. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one chasing, begging, or bending. I was standing still, and she could either meet me there with honesty and effort, or she could stay where she was, alone with her choices. The hardest conversation I ever had was sitting Emily down and explaining, in age-appropriate terms, why Grandma Linda wouldn't be coming around as much anymore. I didn't trash talk Linda or burden Emily with adult details, but I also didn't lie. I told her, Grandma has been making choices that show she's not ready to be the kind of grandmother you deserve. It's not because of anything you did. You are perfect and worthy of so much love. But sometimes people aren't capable of giving what we need, and that's about them, not us. Emily looked at me with those big, wise eyes that sometimes made her seem older than 7 and asked, "Is it okay to be sad about it?" My heart broke and healed at the same time. "Yes, baby," I told her, pulling her close. "It's okay to be sad. It's okay to wish things were different, but we're not going to wait around for someone to show up who's already proven they won't. We're going to build our own happiness, you and me." And we did. We started new traditions. Sunday pancake mornings, movie nights with fort building, weekend adventures to parks and museums. We created a life so full of real presence that Linda's absence stopped leaving such a gaping hole. I also made a promise to myself. I would never let Emily grow up thinking she had to earn love through understanding, patience, or lowering her standards. I wanted her to know that real love doesn't require constant forgiveness of repeated harm, that healthy relationships involve mutual effort, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect yourself from people who refuse to change. If Linda ever wanted back into our lives, she'd have to prove through consistent action, not empty words, that she valued the relationship enough to actually invest in. Until then, Emily and I were fine on our own. Better than fine, actually, because we were finally free from the exhausting cycle of hope and disappointment. Months passed without contact from Linda, and I won't lie, part of me kept expecting her to reach out, to apologize, to finally acknowledge what she'd done. But the silence continued, proving what I'd suspected all along. She was only interested in a relationship on her terms, one where she could come and go as she pleased without accountability or consequence. Her absence after being confronted told me everything I needed to know. She'd rather have no relationship than an honest one. But something unexpected happened during those months of distance. Other family members started reaching out. My Aunt Carol, my cousin Jennifer, even my father Richard, who'd been divorced from Linda for years. They'd all witnessed the pattern, seen the lies, felt uncomfortable with how she treated us, but hadn't known how to intervene. My Aunt Carol confessed, "I've wanted to say something for years, Victoria, but I didn't think it was my place. I'm so proud of you for finally setting boundaries." Hearing that validation from people who'd watched from the sidelines helped me realize I wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't the problem I'd been made to feel like for so long. My father took me out for coffee and shared something that changed my perspective entirely. "Your mother has always been like this," he said quietly. "Even when we were married, she prioritized appearances and her social life over actual family connection. I thought having a child would change her, but it didn't. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from this pattern sooner." Learning that her behavior wasn't personal, that it wasn't about my worth or Emily's worth, helped me release the last remnants of guilt I'd been carrying. Linda's inability to show up wasn't a reflection of us. It was a reflection of her own limitations, her own choices, her own values. And while that truth was painful, it was also incredibly freeing. The months following my confrontation with Linda became a journey of rediscovery, learning who I was without the weight of her expectations and manipulations shaping my identity. I started therapy, something I'd put off for years because I'd convinced myself I didn't need it, that I was handling things fine. But sitting in that therapist's office, finally speaking the truth out loud without filtering it through excuses and justifications, I realized just how not fine I'd been. I'd spent 32 years carrying shame that was never mine to carry. My therapist helped me see the patterns I'd internalized, how I'd learned to make myself small to avoid conflict, how I'd prioritized everyone else's comfort over my own needs, how I'd equated love with suffering and patience with self-abandonment. She asked me a question that shattered something inside me. If Emily came to you 25 years from now with this same story about someone treating her this way, what would you tell her? Without hesitation, I said, I'd tell her to run, that she deserves better, that accepting crumbs isn't love. The therapist nodded. "So why don't you deserve that same advice?" I started practicing something revolutionary, putting myself first without guilt. I said no to obligations that drained me. I stopped over-explaining my boundary. I invested in friendships that were reciprocal, where I wasn't always the one giving, accommodating, understanding, and slowly, gradually, I began to feel lighter, like I'd been carrying a backpack full of rocks my entire life and was finally, one by one, taking them out and setting them down. Emily noticed the change too. One morning she said, "Mommy, you smile more now." That's when I knew. Breaking the cycle wasn't just protecting her from my mother's dysfunction, it was showing her what emotional freedom looked like. A year after our last conversation, Linda reached out, not with an apology or acknowledgement of what she'd done, but with a casual text. Hey, sweetheart, been thinking about you. Would love to take Emily to lunch next week if you're free. As if nothing had happened, as if a year of silence could be bridged with a simple lunch invitation, as if she could waltz back into our lives without doing any of the work of genuine reconciliation. The old Victoria would have jumped at the chance, desperate for any sign that she cared. The new Victoria saw it for what it was, another attempt to engage on her terms without accountability. I responded with clarity I'd never possessed before. If you want to rebuild a relationship with Emily and me, we need to have an honest conversation first, one where you acknowledge the pattern of broken promises and take real responsibility. I'm not interested in pretending the past didn't happen or moving forward without addressing. If you're ready for that conversation, I'm willing. If not, I need to protect Emily and myself from more disappointment. I hit send and felt absolutely nothing. No anxiety, no hope, no fear. Just calm certainty that I'd said what needed to be said without cushioning it to protect her feelings at the expense of mine. She never responded to that message, and her silence was the most honest communication we'd ever had. It confirmed what I'd finally accepted. Linda wanted access to us without the inconvenience of actual relationship, the appearance of being a mother and grandmother without the investment those roles required, and that was okay. I'd stopped waiting for her to become someone she wasn't capable of being. I'd stopped measuring my worth by her willingness to show up. I'd stopped teaching Emily that love meant accepting scraps. We were building something better, a life where presence mattered, where actions matched words, where love wasn't just a concept but a practice. And if Linda ever truly changed, the door wasn't locked, but it also wasn't wide open, waiting. It was simply there, neutral, requiring her to knock with genuine intention before being welcomed back in. Looking back now, I can honestly say that discovering the truth about my mother, as painful as it was, became the catalyst for the most important transformation of my life. That moment in the grocery store parking lot, staring at photos of Linda, living her best life while claiming poverty, didn't just reveal her lies, it revealed mine. The lies I'd been telling myself about what I deserved, about what love looked like, about what it meant to be a good daughter. I'd been so busy being understanding that I'd forgotten to be honest, so focused on maintaining peace that I'd sacrificed my own dignity in the process. The biggest lesson I learned wasn't about my mother at all. It was about me. I learned that boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. I learned that you can love someone and still choose distance. I learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and healing doesn't require the person who hurt you to acknowledge the harm. Most importantly, I learned that breaking generational cycles isn't just about protecting the next generation, it's about finally, belatedly, protecting yourself. Emily is growing up in a home where love is demonstrated through consistent presence, where promises are kept, where she never has to question whether she's worth showing up for. And that's everything I never had but always needed. So after hearing my story, I want to ask you, have you ever made excuses for someone who repeatedly let you down? Have you normalized absence and called it understanding? What patterns are you accepting that you know deep down you deserve better than? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories matter. And here's my challenge to you. If there's someone in your life who's been feeding you the same excuse over and over while their actions tell a completely different story, maybe it's time to trust what you're seeing instead of what you're being told. You deserve people who show up, not just people who make promises. If you want more real, raw stories about breaking free from toxic family dynamic, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next video, and remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival.